Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I guess I would say I'm revisiting the worst card designs of 1994 in terms of I'm looking over at the results of the image polls to see what you guys felt were the worst card designs as compared to the ones that I chose. And so for 1994, there's kind of a feel to the year there are two parts of it. One part of the feel of 1994 is the fact that everybody went borderless, and you have all of these cards where they were experimenting with trying to understand how to make a card design that worked well with virtually no border. But the other side was there was this kind of quirky quality to 1994 that was kind of pop art oriented, that had its own look. And so at the bottom of the list, we see both failed designs to do borderless cards and failed efforts to make bordered cards. And so it's kind of an interesting year to look at. And so when I was looking at the results that you guys came up with, I understand the reasons for just about everything that you guys went with, but there's not a lot of variation between our perspectives except in one very particular case. So it's not really that crazy, but still, there is only one case where you guys agree with me across the board, and that's with baseball. So with the baseball card designs, the card I was least appreciative of was O-Pee-Chee. To me, it was just bland, super bland. But that said, I also felt that Leaf Limited was pretty close. Leaf Limited is a more interesting card design, but it works better as an insert set, not as a full card set. After you get about 20 cards in, it just gets boring. And so it's one of those cool ideas that doesn't work well in one situation, only works well in another. And so for a full set, it's a very boring card. But to me, those two cards were kind of heads above the next two, which were, well, Studio and Flare. Studio was a great idea that just didn't come through, in my opinion. And then Flare almost worked. It at least looks good. It's too busy. So to me, there was a stair step between the two, and well, you guys agreed. The results of the image poll showed that O-Pee-Chee was still the considered the worst design, but right behind it was Limited, and then the other two were also almost the same, with Flare being the most appreciated of them all, but the numbers were twice as big for the first two as to the second two, so it was a stair-step affair. And so yeah, we saw this one the same. Not quite the same though with hockey. So in the case of hockey, the card that I was not a fan of, I mean, Don Russ, I hate that Don Russ design. I'm not a fan of Be a Player either, and Be a Player was right there at number 2, but with Be a Player, I can kind of, well, I really wanted for Be a Player to be the number 1. The thing is, I hate Don Russ to the tune of, to me, Don Russ was the worst card design of 1994. But again, Be a Player was right in there. And well, you guys saw it in reverse. And where for me it was neck and neck, you guys just sailed away with Be a Player. More of you hated Be a Player than Don Russ. And even at that, Don Russ barely beat out Fleer, which I had at number 3. I'm not a fan of Fleer, but how Fleer was almost as disliked as Don Russ, I really don't understand that. At least we were all on the same page, though, for score, which, now score is interesting because when I put the image poll up, right in the early stages, in the first 4 to 6 votes, score leaped ahead of everything else, and I was wondering if that was actually going to be the front runner. It definitely was not, but it was kind of weird to see that happen right at the beginning. And I don't think anybody else voted for it after that, so everything else just moved right past. But the numbers or the scale still looks about the same, except between us, except that we have the number 1 and number 2 flipped, which I totally get. Now over in basketball, it got a lot more interesting because for me, the worst basketball card design for this year was Fleer. And Fleer was, I'm not going to say it was a runaway as much as I liked the images. I hated what they did with everything around the images, which is, you know, the design is supposed to be the whole point. Collector's Choice was what I had for number 2, not because it was just as bad as Fleer, but it's a very bland and it's an underdeveloped card. That was really the problem that I had with it. At number 3, I had Finest, and then at number 4, I had Stadium Club. And Stadium Club is kind of a borderline one where it could have been pretty much anywhere on the list. I had it at number 4 because at least the images do tend to be pretty good. The card design is just underwhelming. Well, for you guys, you were not fans of Stadium Club, and Stadium Club ran away with this. It was a less popular card than any other card on the list. It almost was at 50%. And then the other 3 were almost equal. The first one, which was Fleer, was at 20%, and then you jump over that to Finest at 19%, and then 18% was Collector's Choice. So that meant that it was almost the same order if you just take number 4, move it to 1, or vice versa. But it was amazing that all 3 of the other ones were almost equal, and this one was just way in the lead. And then that brings us to football. So now with football, I had Pacific and Collector's Edge Excalibur neck and neck. I went with Pacific as the worst because the images run together. You just don't see the player in the image. With Collector's Edge, or with Excalibur I should say, at least the player was clear. The card wasn't better. In fact, Pacific was technically better. It's just I couldn't see anything on Pacific. At least with Excalibur I could. Well, you guys felt it was the other way around. You were not fans of Excalibur at all. With Pacific, you were more okay with it, but the thing is that with Pacific and Score, those were equally balanced. And with Score, what was interesting for me with that was I did not have that at number 4. Instead, I chose to add that into this list because I had a feeling that a lot of people would have an opinion, and I was right. By moving it in, Score became tied for second worst as far as you guys were concerned. But it was all about Excalibur, and it does make sense. Like I said, I was on the fence between the two, but I was kind of surprised to see that there was such a clear perspective that was held by people who were voting. And it's possible that it was the particular images that I chose. I really don't know, but that's where we were at with the sport by sport. So for me, when I did my worst of list, I had Donruss as the worst, and I had Be a Player right in there. But Pacific was in there, and Fleer was in there. And so for my list of the worst card designs of 1994, I was starting out with a different list than you guys were in terms of the front runners. Only O-Pee-Chee was the same between us, and I didn't really see O-Pee-Chee as that terrible when compared to the others. So it really didn't count on my top, at least my top 4 list. For you guys, however, it was different because where for me Donruss was the worst, for you guys, well, that was Be a Player, but look, like I said, those were neck and neck. Of course, if Be a Player was the option over Donruss, of course I would have that as the worst as well. And like you guys, a runaway lead for that one. For number 2, you guys had Excalibur, and yeah, I can see that. I think I would agree with that, but O-Pee-Chee almost made it with Fleer. O-Pee-Chee had just a bit of a vote, and between this list, I'm not sure why there were votes for it, but that was the top 4, or the 4 worst, the ranking of the 4 worst as far as you guys were concerned, based upon the options that were available. I do understand that there were cards I did not put onto the different sports, and then even when you go from the different sports to the main list, I can only put 4 options on the list, and so that means that there are other cards that could very well make a presence on this. But the one weakness I have with the image poll is the fact that it's not a ranking, it's a single selection. And so I don't get a feeling for from best to worst or top to bottom like I'd like. So it makes it a little bit more thin. But at any rate, these are the cards that were ranked, or the ranking of the worst card designs based upon individual selections of which one's worst. So that concludes the worst of for 1994. Now I get to start to explore some older cards, which is going to be really fun to go through. This is going to be pretty fascinating to me. So definitely keep looking out for these image polls as we move along. And I want to thank you guys for voting for these and for participating in all of this. And I also want to thank you for watching.